Shaan and Gonzalo speaking to us. They are from Wild Banana Design. So I'll do a short introduction and then they will go through their presentation. Thank you so much for joining. I hope everybody is doing well this morning. So Wild Banana Design is an ecological design practice founded in 2021 by architects and regenerative designers Shaan and Gonzalo. With more than 40 years combined experience in complex infrastructure and ecological design projects, the practice focuses on creating resilient, thriving systems where people and nature coexist in balance. In their own words, our work integrates architecture, permaculture, land regeneration, and water retention practices into a single approach to planning and design by combining strategic clarity with ecological sensitivity. We help clients restore degraded land into vibrant, biodiverse ecosystems while meeting practical human needs. Colleagues, over to you.
Thank you, Skura.
Morning. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, Skura, for the introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining us so early on your Friday morning. We are so grateful to have you all here. And we really find it's a lot more energetic and engaging if we are all engaged. So we'd really like to encourage you guys to be active in the chat, to ask questions. If we can't answer your questions while we're presenting, we will get to them. But yeah, please feel free to engage in the chat. It really helps us as the presenter and you as the participant to, I think, just feel more connected. And so to start off, to get us all sort of wake us all up and get us engaged, I would love to know from you, when is the last time, and you don't need to overthink it, when is the last time that you can think of a moment that you really felt connected to nature or you really felt aware of nature? Let me know in the chat. And while you're thinking of an idea, I'm going to let you know mine. So we recently got chickens and a rooster. And if you don't know, roosters start crowing at like 4 in the morning on the hour every hour. But what I've really loved about it, it's completely shifted my spatial awareness and my time awareness. So every time I hear the rooster crow, it kind of my whole spatial awareness expands. And I also, from 4 in the morning, I'm aware of what the time is and what's happening sort of on the broader spectrum. So I've really enjoyed how just this introduction of animals, of this particular animal, has sort of shifted my whole spatial awareness and connection to my property. So let me know in the chat what something is. It could be a walk you went on, a sunrise, a bird call you heard. Let me know in the chat something that you felt really connected to nature. Maybe Gonzalo has one as well.
Sure.
Put you on the spot.
You put me on the spot, yeah. Yeah, I think there's many of them. We are fortunately enough that we live in a quite natural environment. So
it's just typical Shaan will put you on the spot.
Exactly. I'm sure you knew this was coming.
I know, it always happens, Ruben. Yeah, so I think like for me it's like the frogs. Also, we got a little pond, and the frogs at night they go absolutely mental, and it's this more soothing sound to go to sleep, and I just absolutely love it.
Yes, my roof leaked this morning, very close to nature. I hear you. We also have a few roof leaks here where we are. I hear readback daily. That's so special. Amazing. So keep putting them in the chat. I'd love to hear more of them. Having my cup of tea on the veranda this morning and watching the birds. Beautiful, Kim.
Beautiful.
Wonderful. So as you keep putting your ideas into the chat, today's talk is about architecture beyond buildings, designing systems that shape life. Now, you might be coming into this talk thinking that, this is going to be about sustainability and green buildings, or maybe it's going to be about landscaping. And that's really not what we're going to be talking about today. What we want to talk about today is really understanding nature's core principles and systems so that we can really integrate the way we're intervening and building, so that these systems are deeply interconnected and we can start to really intervene in these ecosystems in a positive way, in a way that's far more engaged and than just green building or aesthetic landscaping. So that's really what we want to talk about today.
So I walked out of my daughter's bedroom and it was late at night, and the lights in the living room were shining in my face. And I was so exhausted, I just collapsed on the couch. And I wasn't really physically exhausted, I was mentally exhausted. So since my daughter was born, it was about a year before that time, I felt like, when you shake a bottle of soda, and I felt like that. I felt like all my feelings were all bubbling out of me. And all of a sudden, I felt completely dissatisfied with life in the city. It was the pace, the noise. It felt like completely incompatible with living with a toddler. And also, I was hitting a roadblock in my professional career, and I felt completely demotivated. I felt like I lost my purpose. And we were talking that evening, Shaan and I, and we thought, you know what, we've been escaping every single weekend, every single holiday. We've been going away to natural places. That's the only place where we felt really comfortable, really at ease, at peace, And we thought we got to change that. We really want to change our life to really suit what we longing for, right?
And, so we made a big shift. We left the city and we moved down to the south coast onto a 1 hectare property across from the road from the beach. But we really wanted to take that a level further and start to integrate that into our careers as well. We'd made all of these lifestyle changes, but we felt like we needed to expand that into our careers. And so we started looking at, green building and sustainability. We did some work with Passive House, but nothing really connected to us at all. Nothing really felt truly transformational. And at some point, we came across permaculture. And permaculture is known as permanent agriculture. So it's an agriculture system. But there's something about it that just really connected to us and really made so much sense because it's really design based, right? It's all about designing systems, designing design principles. And it was something we really understood, coming from a background of strategic planning, working on big infrastructure projects that had lots of moving parts. It really spoke the same language. Instead of moving with building parts, though, we were working with natural parts, and it really resonated with us. And so we sort of went full in and decided to shift our careers to really be more focused on land regeneration. And over the past few years, that's what we've been working on and developing our skills and working on that part of our careers.
And the interesting part is that after a few years of doing that transition, we realized that we were really escaping from the city into this beautiful natural environment down the south coast that we are now. And we don't really regret the decision, but we also realizing how much more we could have done while we were living in the city. We're thinking about how much more we could have done in that small apartment that we had, how much more we could have done with our projects in a city and urban environments. And that is actually what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about today what are the key strategies that you need to consider to be able to start applying all these principles to your own projects, regardless of where they are. So we're going to talk first, we're going to go through some challenges that you may be experiencing right now. And then we're going to be talking also about what are the opportunities and what we're going to be focusing on this presentation. So the first challenge is that there is climate pressure, right? So we know that our industry is a huge contributor of the carbon footprint, the emissions into the atmosphere. And there's a lot of talk about it. There is a lot of pressure in trying to build more green and less carbon footprint type of buildings. So there's a lot of pressure, right? And we feel that we need to do something in our projects. The other challenge is that a lot of the solutions we have involve having costly technologies and involve literally start adding cost to our projects. And sometimes, or most of the times, this is a big challenge, right? So we want to do the right things, but our clients may not be able to afford it or may not be aligned. And that becomes a challenge for us. The other one is the hard convincing. And I'm sure you all been in this situation. Put in the chat if you've been, we've been in this situation many times when we were working on architectural projects. You just got all these ideas. You want to try to get your client on board, but they're just not buying it, right? So you try to convince them these are the right things. It's going to be good for you. It's going to be good for the project. Going to be good for the planet. But at the end of the day, they're making the decisions, and you feel frustrated because you can't implement half of the things that you had in mind, right? So let us know in the chat. Have you been in this situation?
What are some of the biggest challenges you face when it comes to these ideas? Yeah, let us know in the chat. It'd be great to see where you're coming from. And while we get that, let's talk about the positive spin. Like, what are the actual opportunities that we have? So some of the opportunities we have are that we can really go beyond compliance, right? This is simple strategies that we can use to go way beyond SANS XA or green lead certifications or anything like that. Like, how can we actually use these ideas to really elevate our projects in a positive way and go completely beyond compliance? And then this is also really about occupant and planet health, right? I think when we talk about sustainability, we have these like vague ideas about like carbon footprints, and it's really not very tangible, you know? What we're talking about is how can we really directly impact the health and well-being of your clients, the people using the buildings, the surrounding society and community that engage with that building, and of course the overall ecosystem and planetary health at large. And there really is an amazing opportunity for us to start to improve the well-being on all of these different scales. And then we can feel empowered to lead the shift. And I think that's what we really want you guys to walk away from today, is instead of feeling like, wow, to do anything green feels really challenging, I want you to walk away feeling inspired that you could start to make some just small shifts in the way you think about your projects to really feel empowered to start leading a shift in a positive way so that we can start to impact ecosystem health and the health of our clients and really lead this in a way that's forward and actually tangible in our projects.
Awesome.
Okay, so Gonzalo is going to be leading us through 5 big ideas. I am going to hop over into the chat. So if you have any questions coming up while he's presenting, you can put them in the chat and I will be there to answer your questions. So yeah, I'm going to take it over.
We also have some time at the end to go through questions live and so on. But if you come up with something, don't wait until the end. Just type it in the chat and then Shaan will keep track of them. Just move here a little bit. All right. Okay, so the first big idea is that you got to fix the broken carbon cycle. And you know, there is a lot of emphasis, there is a lot of effort, not just in our industry, all around the world for the last few decades, we've been so focused on trying to reduce the carbon emissions. And carbon emissions are important. It's a big amount of emissions that we're putting extra into the atmosphere, but we're losing the perspective of the entire big picture. And the big picture is that carbon is a cycle. It's one of the most vital cycles in our planet. We need the carbon cycle for life to happen in the planet and the way we see life in the planet, right? So carbon is the source of any organic matter, is the source of any nutrition in the planet. Trees, through photosynthesis, convert CO2 into food, into organic matter, into all of us. We're all made out of carbon. So that is a very, very important cycle. So while the focus is being on carbon emission, we need to shift that focus into the big picture, into the big carbon cycle. And what's happening with the carbon cycle, and I'm going to give you a little scientific fact just to put it into perspective, is that just the CO2, the carbon dioxide emissions from the soil, it's everything that lives in the soil, only the soil around the planet is estimated to be 8 to 10 times bigger than the total global carbon emissions of the whole humanity across the globe, including fossil fuels, including industry. So 8 to 10 times more of that CO2 that we put into the atmosphere is being put into the atmosphere by everything living under the soil on a year basis. And that is a huge amount, right? So, and that's not considering all the living things above the ground. It's not considering vegetation. It's not considering all the animals. It's not considering all the humans through the natural biological processes. So I'm not saying that the carbon emissions are not important. They're still a fair amount, and it's a big amount, and all the efforts to trying to reduce the carbon emissions are definitely important, but we got to shift the focus into why is all this CO2 being built up into the atmosphere and causing all the knock-on effects that we all know in terms of climate change and shift in certain atmospheric parameters, right? So that's the one thing. The other thing is that 60% of all that carbon that is in the atmosphere is actually brought back in part of this carbon cycle by vegetation. That's all through photosynthesis on Earth ecosystems. The other 40% is through the oceans. So the vegetation has a really, really important role in bringing that carbon back from the atmosphere. So the broken piece here is that we've actually been tampering with this mechanism that nature has to bring carbon back from the atmosphere by deforesting large amounts of land in our planet, by tampering with the ecosystem, drying wetlands, destroying ecosystems, and using a commercial agricultural system that actually don't look after vegetation and the soil. So we're actually destroying the mechanism that nature has to bring carbon back and is building up into the atmosphere. So we live in an area here in the South Coast. If you know the South Coast, you probably know that is one of the most dysfunctional municipalities in terms of water supply. And we actually knew a little bit about it, but we got the realization when we moved here. And in one of the many water cuts that we had, and we went back to sleep and woke up in the morning, and I just heard this little trickling in the kitchen. I was like, what's going on there? So I walked into the kitchen, and the kitchen was completely flooded. Looked at the kitchen sink, and somehow we left the tap open, the plugs in, and the sinks were overflowing. They've been overflowing for quite some time. And obviously, my first reaction was to go to the kitchen, switch the tap off, and then pull the plug out, right? And then only after that, I went and started to clean up all the mess. And it's obvious, right? But what we're doing with carbon emissions and the carbon cycle is that we keep trying to clean the mess before we actually taking the tap out of the sink, right? So what we're talking about here is actually shifting the perspective. And yes, carbon emissions are important. We gotta try to reduce them as much as we can. But the biggest impact that we can cause in terms of carbon emissions is actually to bring it back and turn it into really productive matter, food, life, biology. And we can only do that by actually creating and allowing for more vegetation to be in our cities, to be all around us, and to look after the forested environments we have right now. All right, so that's the first big idea. Let me know in the chat if you have any questions. Like, please feel free to put it there. Let us know. I know it's kind of a bit of a shift in perspective, and we wanna, guys, and that's the purpose also of this presentation today, is to give you some angles that maybe you haven't really considered, and maybe through this helping you to start seeing things and the profession in a different way. All right, so the second big idea is that human health mirrors ecosystem health. Now, we are ecosystems ourselves. We are not isolated. We are made out of different types of cells all around us. And when we moved into our homestead and our home here, and we started to learn more about soils, we realized that the more we learn about soils, we realize how important for having healthy soils and growing healthy vegetables is to actually look after every single thing that is living in the soil, every single ecosystem, because soils become really fertile and resilient when you have a lot of life, a lot of microbial life, a lot of different types of tiers in the food soil web. And so it's all about creating this really healthy ecosystem. And that is the secret to actually grow good food consistently and good quality, right? And so it's all more, everything is connected. Everything is forming part of the bigger system. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we are also part of an ecosystem. We actually have about 30 trillion, estimated 30 trillion human cells, but also 38 trillion bacterial cells. So in terms of cell count, we have more bacterial cells in our body that human. And the important thing is that we need all these microorganisms in our body to be healthy. We need all of this to be not just physically, but also mentally healthy. And these microorganisms that you've probably heard about, the gut microbiome, and you probably heard about the microbiome in our skin. All these organisms are so important. They even actually are able to start activating certain genes within our DNA. So they shape the way we are. If you have any twin brothers or sisters or siblings, or you have twin children, or you have twin friends, you probably know if they're identical twins, they're 100% identical when they're born. But over time, they become more and more different, to the point like my dad is a twin, identical twin. And when we were little, and when they were much younger, my cousins couldn't differentiate any of them. They always got super confused. I always knew who was my dad, but my cousins couldn't differentiate it. Now that they're much older, there is a clear distinction. Everyone knows who's who because they've evolved in different ways. The genetic material is the same, but it's their lifestyle, is everything around the life that is shaped them into different human beings. And that's happening with us all the time. So it is really important that we pay attention to the ecosystems around us, because all these microorganisms that are so important for our mental and physical well-being and coming from the environment around us. They're coming from the soil, from the food that we eat. They're coming from the air that we breathe. They're coming from the contact that we have with the surfaces around us. And so it is important that we want to be healthy. We have a healthy ecosystem around us. And this is not just something that we just making out of nowhere. There's a lot of research and studies done around this, right? So it is demonstrated and it's proven that in cities, in urban environments, the rates of asthma, allergies, autoimmune diseases, and even depression are much higher than in rural areas. And even the WHO, the World Health Organization, estimates that about 7 million premature deaths happen in city environments. They talk about air pollution, but it's also about the lack of the right microorganisms in our bodies to be able to become resilient and healthy human beings. So the message is like we gotta pay attention of what we have around us, not just the having clean spaces, but also having contact with all these natural spaces. Let me know in the chat, because that's something that was one of the triggers for us to make this big change in our lives. Is like, every single time we fell down or we felt, mentally overwhelmed, and we go to any natural space, we go away for the weekend somewhere to the Berg for a hike, or somewhere up the North Coast to game reserve, whatever it was, we all of a sudden felt like all that pressure disappeared. We felt so much more comfortable, like our heart rate kind of came down. We start feeling really, really well physically and mentally. And it wasn't just about being away from the city, but it was about being in contact with nature, right? That's what we biologically evolve over millions of years. So let me know in the chat if you have any experience like that lately. Have you had any moment where you been really having a tough time, and then you've gone away somewhere, and then all of a sudden you just felt this kind of weight lifting off your shoulder just by being in this environment? It would be great to see you guys if you want to share. And again, all this is backed by science as well, right? So this is a study that was done on people that had some mental conditions, and they realized it was a large study done, and they realized that exposure to nature helped to improve the mood and reduce stress and anxiety, better cognitive functioning, but also hypertension reduction. The blood pressure changed just by being in nature. they had better sleep. So it has a range of benefits that just by exposing these people that they were vulnerable to natural environments, it completely changed the way they operated. So this is something, again, that we need to consider if we really want to create impact in our clients, in the occupants in our buildings. It's just look at what are we creating? Are we creating just buildings? Are we creating ecosystems around us? And what can we do about it? So things that you have to consider, this is what we call the health loop, right? So it's a simple diagram to explain all these connections, right? So microbes are absolutely essential for the health of the soil, right? Soil is, as you probably know, absolutely important and critical to have healthy plants. But healthy plants are also very critical for us to be healthy. And a lot of people are talking about food as a medicine. It is absolutely true, right? So the reason why we need medicines, the reason why we need supplements, we need probiotics is because the food that we're eating don't have the nutrients, don't have the vitamins, don't have the microbiology that we need to function healthily, and we gotta supplement it with products bought from the chemical industry, right? So all of this is connected. Animals has also an impact on the microbes. So as you see, this is a loop and that is working together, and it's also working in both directions. It's not one directional, it's also bidirectional, because animals will also impact on the health of the plants. Plants will also have an impact on the health of the soil and on the microbes in the soil. So everything is completely connected and across. So it's essentially an intertwined loop, right? And it's important to understand this because this is things that we have to consider in our planning. These are things that we need to consider in our design if we really want to create projects that have a really positive impact, not just on the planet, but also on, as we mentioned earlier, on the health of the occupants as well. All right, so I hope you guys are doing well. I'm not checking the chat and seeing Shaan tapping away quite a bit. So I'm assuming there is some questions going there, and if Shaan cannot cope with all the questions live during the chat, we're gonna be going through some of them at the end as well. So the idea number 3 is that there are no natural disasters, and I know that we've been all quite sensitive. We had quite a few natural disasters around us recently. We had the floods in Durban, which was absolutely devastating, and up the North Coast, we had a drought that was also really devastating. Cape Town and Eastern Cape recently, and you may think, well, we're getting natural disasters all around the world, right? So Valencia had huge floods, and all around the world is happening. Fires in California. So what am I talking about? Well, what I'm talking about is that all these disasters have been caused by humans, have been caused by the way we manage our land and we manage our cities. They're not natural. You don't have these disasters happening in natural, healthy ecosystems. They are the results of the land degradation that we've been creating over the years by how we manage our land. If you think about a drought is caused because the soils have been depleted for the vegetation. That vegetation, and there is another aspect before I go there that we haven't mentioned, and is that pair with the carbon cycle, another of the really critical cycles in nature is the water cycle. And this is another cycle that we've been tampering in the way we manage our land, right? So we tamper with the mechanism that nature has to cycle water through the atmosphere, through the vegetation, through the oceans. And we cannot really go into too much detail today because we don't really have time. I could actually spend a whole talk on just the water cycle. But I just want to mention that cycle is being tampered. That cycle is being disrupted, and is the primary cause for all these big events that we call natural disasters. So as a consequence of that, when you look at the the vegetation that we strip from large amount of land around the world. Then you're depleting the soil from life. This soil have become compacted as a result of that. Then that water is not infiltrated, is not replening the aquifers. So the land is essentially drying out. And that is the seed for droughts. And that vegetation, those ecosystems are not able to have the water reserve that they need for dry periods, and they're drying out, right? So that is the source of many of the droughts that we have. Then you have land that is being degraded, plants that they're actually not healthy, that they're struggling, soil that doesn't have enough moisture, and then spark will turn into a devastating fire. So again, that's part of the cycle and the loop of these kind of events. And then after the fire is devastated and is degraded even more the land, then you have land that is super hard, that is super compacted. There is no enough vegetation, not enough roots to be able to infiltrate that water. And then when it rains heavily, all that water kind of sheds off, runs off, causing devastation in the form of floods. So these are all a cycle. And if you think about all these events that happen, think about, for example, Cape Town, the droughts in Cape Town a couple of years ago. They had 3 years of severe drought. What happened after that drought was finished? There were big fires. Then there was big flooding. As soon as the rain came, the land couldn't cope with that, and then resulted in flooding, right? And the same thing happened in Durban. The way we manage our land around our cities is resulted in huge amounts of water being directed uncontrolled because the landscape and the ecosystems are not be able to absorb and contain this water. And so this water is actually being lost for the ecosystems. Same thing happened in Valencia. So if you think about it, all around the world is the same pattern of drought, floods, fires. So what can we do about it? And this is one of the most powerful tools that we have. And we want to talk about the concept of sponge cities. This is a concept coined by the architect Kondian Yu, a Chinese architect. He years ago started coining this term and started working on really interesting projects to overcome this problem. Unfortunately, I actually read the other day, he passed away last week, I think it was. He was somewhere. It was like a airplane crash, small airplane crash in Brazil. He was going through for the architectural biennale, and yeah, he unfortunately he passed away very sadly. So he founded company Touriscape, and he was a very outspoken about really working with nature to make our cities much better cities, and not just for the overall environment, for the actually benefit of the people living in the city and the citizens, right? So the core idea of Span City is that try to utilize all that water that is shed from the cities, all the hard surfaces, the roofs, all that water that is usually being sent through stormwater reticulation to plants to purify, to be able to put back into the rivers or into the oceans, essentially fast tracking the pace of that water from the buildings straight out into the ocean without going through the ecosystem. So that water is lost for our land, and but also clogging our infrastructure and potentially causing big issues in case of big rain events, because we know that in Durban, right? Our infrastructure is not coping, and then you end up with floods everywhere, right? So the alternative to that is actually to utilize that water to infiltrate it, to create spongy soils, to create spongy ecosystems where you can actually now start creating diversity, biological diversity, start creating health right in the middle of the cities. We're not talking about parks, we're talking about real ecosystems with high levels of diversity, healthy ecosystems that will be the lungs of our cities, that will not only absorb the water becomes a catalyst for all these environments to be able to flourish, and also start creating spaces for recreation, spaces to cool down the effect of the cities. Hard surfaces absorb huge amount of heat, this heat is released. Our cities is becoming heat domes that is also having an impact on the climate. These type of interventions are actually reversing all of that. And this is a 22 hectare in the city in Taijing in China. It's a wetland park. It's a huge amount of space, large scale kind of intervention. But the beauty of this is that you can do it at small scale. We're doing that in our property. Our property is just 1 acre. You can do this in small suburban properties. And the more people do this got an exponential effect. The more people and the more architects, the more we include this in our projects, the bigger the effect is going to be. So you can do large interventions like this, which will have a large impact, but obviously require resources and a lot of planning. But you can also do small interventions at whatever scales you can. Start introducing these kind of principles in your project, even if it's a small house for a client, if it's an office building with some kind of land around it, if it's a residential development, you can do that at different scales and start creating impact. And exponentially, if we all do it, the impact will be huge. So this is another project, same company, Tourandscape. This is in Kunuli Stormwater Park in Harbin, another city in China. This is 34 hectares and the same principles. If you see the scale of the building infrastructure around it is huge. Tall buildings, a lot of hard surfaces, but all of a sudden you have this oasis of wetlands, of vegetation, of forest, and becomes, as I mentioned earlier, becomes the lungs, becomes a cooling space to bring the temperature of the entire city down, to make the city way more livable, healthier, and also dealing with becoming more resilient, right? Because you're dealing now with flashes of water and being able to withstand drought without drying out because it's got plenty of water in the ground. So this is the kind of vision I think we should be looking at as a prototype or as a landmark for all our projects. All right. Great. So just taking the time, so making sure that we are on track. So the four big idea is that buildings are not islands, and you probably guessed this from what we've been talking about. Same as we are ecosystems, and we're not really in isolation. We actually not even human anymore. We humans in a community with a whole bunch of organisms around us, and we're all working together to become really great people. Buildings are the same. Buildings are part of an ecosystem, and they're not in isolation. And the problem is that we often, when we practice, we focus on the buildings and we let the rest of the project to be dealt by other professionals. I mean, we've been there. We've done it many times, It's a lot of pressure when you're practicing. Also, it's a lot of dynamics, and then you end up like literally focusing on the building. You may have a landscape architect coming and then doing some pretty landscape around it, and then great, done. But by doing that, we're losing the opportunity of really creating healthy ecosystems, and that's what we're talking about in this idea. Building is part of the bigger system, and if we can integrate the buildings within this system, we can tap into all these opportunities that we wouldn't do if we are only focusing on the buildings, right? So what can we do to reverse that island effect that are called, focusing just on the buildings? So there are a few things that you can start shifting, and then all of a sudden these opportunities are going to be unlocking. And we've talked about some of them already. So in terms of water, if you are working in isolation, you're just shaving all the stormwater from the building, putting all the roof through the gutters into a stormwater system, taking it away. Maybe all your gray water and the black water in your building is also going through the sewer, taking it away. Somebody else will deal with that at some point and then dispose it, right? But if you're looking at integration, like we saw in the example before in China, then you can harvest that water. You can turn that water into a resource. That could be the catalyst for a beautiful ecosystem that is going to improve the quality of your project greatly, right? So that's the difference between isolation and integration when it comes to water. But we can take it one step further. We can look at productivity. We can look at, and instead of looking at ornamental landscape, which essentially is a desert with very little function, very little positive impact, and we can look at our lands beyond aesthetics, beyond colors, beyond what it looks like, and then turn into productive ecosystems where we actually looking at building life, creating as much biodiversity as possible, attracting pollinators, attracting birds, probably producing some food and fruits and nuts, and becoming a place of interaction, and a place of enjoyment and a place of health for our projects, right? And in terms of waste, instead of like creating outputs and dealing with that pollution in terms of landfills and maybe a little some recycling, we can literally start taking a lot of the waste in our buildings and put it back into our systems and creating new cycles. All the organic matter can be composted, can be put back into the system, can start feeding and creating these ecosystems in a really powerful and meaningful way. And then lastly, we can look at things like a microclimate. And again, this is an aspect that is being completely underrated, what we're seeing in many projects. And as I mentioned earlier, hard surfaces create a huge amount of heat storage, and that becomes a problem at large scale and small scale. How can we offset that? By having vegetation. Vegetation has the amazing ability of literally cool down the environment. They are moderators of temperature both ways. If it's extremely cold, it will keep the temperature at a range that is way more livable. And the opposite is true. And in our case, in our climate, is we're pretty much dealing with the opposite, and we want to cool down, right? So vegetation through transpiration has the ability to cool down the environment. But not only that, it's got the ability to screen our winds to make our spaces, our buildings way more comfortable. So strategically planning our vegetation, we can actually create high levels of comfort and in our buildings, right? And not only creating windscreen, but also filtering those winds. So if it's summer winds, you can cool down those winds through the vegetation. So the result is a much cooler breeze that you get through there. And you can start creating shade in certain parts of the building through this vegetation. You can creating outdoor spaces that are way more comfortable. We've got a space here in our property and that is quite forested and protected from the easterly winds. Is the most amazing place to be in summer when it is really windy, because you're literally sitting there, you don't really feel the wind at all, and it's cool, it's amazing, and then you walk away from that space and it's howling, right? We're very close to the ocean. So it's huge opportunities to create microclimates and really enhance your projects by utilizing nature and vegetation along the way. And so this is just an example of one of our projects, and this is the only project we're showing ourselves. And we wanted to focus on the ideas rather than on being showing a lot of images. But I think this project is relevant. This is a project that we did for developing up the north coast in Slally area. It's called a Riverly Green Corridor. We're working with a developer. We don't know how far this project is going to go, if it's going to go ahead or not. But anyway, it was an interesting exercise. And it was a mixed-use development, medium scale, medium density residential, and offices and some small industry or light industry as well, workshops and so on. And it was in a land that was previously sugarcane, very degraded land after the use of many pesticides and burning and so on, like really hard soil. But because of the shape of the land and all these hills, there was this huge opportunity because the developer couldn't develop the whole land. There was some pieces of land left in between these hills. And so that was a huge opportunity to create a series of green corridors. And that's what you see now in the image. And in these different hatches and colors is the different corridors in between the developable areas. And so we decided is like to start creating highly diverse ecosystems within these corridors. this is going to be the buffer between all these different sub-developments in the whole bigger development. So how can we start now tapping into using all these resources, using the water? All the stormwater from these developments will go into these buffer zones, and we can start tapping into this, creating wetlands, creating highly diverse landscapes, and how we can start now to create some productivity. There were opportunities to start introducing fruit trees, food forests, so the residents could actually have a really good resource, also recreational spaces, but could also have this resource of food at no cost to them, right? And also opportunities for entrepreneurship. There are opportunities to introduce animals so the grasses can be grazed in a regenerative way. So it could be dairy production. There was a micro dairy that was interested in the project. They could actually produce milk and dairy products right there and be delivered to the residents. So shortening the distribution of these products, right straight to the door of the resident right there. And then we could start using chickens, and we'll follow the cows, will help to build the ecosystem, will help to increase the soil fertility and help for all these fruit trees to grow very healthily and resiliently, and also produce eggs and potentially meat as well for all the residents. So opportunities for entrepreneurs to actually be part of the management of these lands. And it was like a hybrid between a regenerative farming, and green corridor, kind of recreational parks, and really healthy ecosystems for all these residents to and occupants to enjoy. So that was a kind of the main goal of this project. And I think that is something that you can also start retrofitting in the cities. And I think that is a very huge opportunity for us to start reconsidering how we create our green spaces within the city, our parks. In Durban, there are many different little parks that they're so disused. We had one right next to our property in Morningside, and it was just a piece of land left on its own. We used to go there to walk our dogs, and we kept thinking, like, such a lost opportunity. I mean, you can turn that into such a productive, a really beautiful space, very small, but if all the community contribute to that, if we design our buildings to actually contribute to that as well, you can create really interesting green spaces and green corridors within the existing cities. All right, so I think we are doing quite well on time. So
We're still good.
yeah, okay,
We're
perfect.
still good with time, yeah, Sean.
Perfect. All right, so this is the first time we do this talk, so that's why I'm kind of keeping an eye on the time, because I tend to kind of talk. I get it very passionate, and I'm glad that I move away from water, because otherwise I could spend the whole morning talking about water. So anyway, idea number 5 is that you got to apply nature's principles for resilience. And I know this word is being spoken a lot in our industry for the last few years. We're talking about creating resilient cities. We're talking about creating resilient projects. We all want to be resilient, but we got to understand what resilience means, right? And to me, the biggest and best example of resilience is nature. Nature to me is the ultimate resilience. Nature is able to overcome 6 major extinctions and come even stronger and more diverse after each one of them. So, and it's mind-blowing. It's like you get a meteorite hitting the earth, everything disappears, and all of a sudden things come way stronger, more vibrant, more fertile, more lively, way more diverse. So, and it would be interesting to see what's going to happen after, what they call the 7th extinction, which apparently is where we are living right now. But the reality is that there are certain particular elements that makes nature being able to bounce back from all these environmental changes so strongly. And these are the things that we got to pay attention, because these are the things that we want to include in our designs to make our projects more resilient, right? So what are the three key pillars? For me, there are three key elements that makes nature so resilient, and these are the things that we gotta pay attention to. The one is diversity. The more is better. This is completely the opposite to minimalism. So this is not about having few of the right things. It's about having the more you have, the more diversity, the more diverse plants you have, the healthier the ecosystem is. There's a lot of science around it. There's a lot of studies done around it. The more you have of animals, the different, what do you call it? I forgot the technical word, like the trophic levels that you have in an ecosystem, the more you have, the more healthier and the more resilient this ecosystem is, right? So the more is better. Then it comes integration. It's not about having a lot of diversity. It's actually having all this diversity as integrated as possible. This is about avoiding islands. If something is isolated, it becomes a problem, right? I heard from a prominent a doctor talk about cancer in a way that I've never heard before. Cancer is a cell that gets isolated. It doesn't know that there is a whole world beyond it, and it becomes completely self-sufficient and becomes acting on its own because it doesn't know that there is a whole bunch of other cells around it. And that creates a tumor. A tumor is this cell starts reproducing, thinking that it's on its own. And I'm not a doctor, so don't quote me on this. I just like the analogy and I found really, really interesting. So I don't know how much of nuances add this. So if any of you guys are very much into medicine, you may be proving slightly wrong, but that definition I found really, really powerful in terms of like something gets isolated, becomes a problem. If somebody gets isolated from society, becomes a problem. We've seen that many, many different times, right? So isolation is the opposite to creating resilience and creating a healthy ecosystem. So we're talking about integration, right? Now, the third pillar is redundancy, and this is absolutely critical. Everyone talk, I mean, I heard that many times, nature is like a perfect machine. Nature is actually the opposite to a machine. A machine is something that is efficient, that is also fragile. If something fails in that machine, you gotta fix it or you gotta replace it. The machine is not gonna work because every piece is designed, it's engineered, so it just got its function, and only that piece is doing that function. So if that fails, you gotta replace it or you gotta fix it. Otherwise, the machine doesn't work, even if it's a small thing. But nature doesn't work on that kind of efficiency. Nature works on redundancy. And redundancy means that there's functions done by many. It's not by one organism. There are many organisms fulfilling the same function. And what that does is that if one of the organisms, for whatever reason, suffers because maybe it's not being able to cope with certain environmental conditions, maybe there is whatever it may be, that organism is replaced, that function is replaced by something else. So the whole system doesn't collapse. So those are the three key pillars. Now, the interesting thing is that when you start looking at the intersection between these three pillars, for example, the intersection between diversity and integration, then it's when you get in community. You get in community of people, when people get together, and you get community of living beings or whatever it may be. It's all depending on this community and this diversity and integration. That's how community flourish and community emerges. Between redundancy and integration, that's where the true efficiency comes. That's the efficiency of nature. Efficiency doesn't come from every single piece fitting the puzzle. It's about having a lot of pieces overlapping each other and making sure that there's always something fulfilling that function at any time. And then between redundancy and diversity, when you have a lot of diversity and a lot of redundancy, you essentially have a safety net. You essentially know that things are going to be progressing regardless of what's going to happen. If there is a drought, there's going to be plants that are going to be able to resist that drought. There are going to be plants that are going to be able to support the whole system throughout that process. It's going to be able to support other vegetation and help other vegetation to cope with that drought. Because they are adapted to that. So these are the key aspects of resilience. Now, how do you apply this to your projects, and we talked about some of these things already in the examples that we showed earlier. But I want to show one more case study that I found really powerful. And this is a project taken over years by Brad Lancaster. Interestingly enough, actually, he comes from, I think his mother is South African, I think. He's got a tie with South Africa. And he's actually, the origin of his journey was in Zimbabwe. He made, it's another long story for another day, but anyway, he's got connection with Southern Africa. He lives in Arizona and in the United States, and the city of Tucson, and he lives in a neighborhood. Tucson, Arizona is a very, very dry, arid climate. And what he started doing is he started to collect water from the roads. Initially, he did it illegally. He just kind of overnight, he started cutting the curbs and bringing water into the paved areas, and they started creating gardens around his house because he was already transforming his house. He was trying to tap water from the roofs and creating a little bit of an ecosystem in his house. And he decided to take that beyond his boundaries and start changing the neighborhood. And just by tapping onto that water and start planting key vegetation and trees, indigenous trees, and so on, he started completely transforming the whole neighborhood. So in this image here, you see on top, that was a photo of his property. It's in the corner, before he started this project. And a couple of years later, the photo below, that's the result. Now, if you think about that happening in a really arid, almost like a desert environment, that's quite incredible. So he's been tapping onto the flash rains that they get, usually in the desert, being able to divert all that water into these walkways, and then turning that into beautiful forests where they cool down, improving the quality of his home, essentially, but also improving the walkability of the city, creating fruit. A lot of these trees are actually indigenous fruit trees. So people are walking the street and being able to help themselves to beautifully organic grown fruit, right? And to the point that actually when the municipality realized what he was doing, and in terms of instead of trying to discipline him and fine him and whatever, they actually saw the impact and they're actually rolling out these kind of interventions across the city. So now they're actually encouraging people around the whole Tucson to actually start tapping into these resources. And the photo you saw before, this one here, that's actually a proper curve now designed to capture this water. So they're doing that throughout the entire city, right? So these are small interventions, and again, goes back to what I mentioned earlier. You can start at any scale and eventually create a huge impact. You don't really have to do a 22 or 35 hectare intervention to cause impact. I mean, if you can, obviously that'd be great. But you can also start small. You can start in the corner of a property. You can start in a small project. And then with that, start creating impact and rolling out to other areas. When people start seeing the results, they will start buying into your ideas. And that way, we talked about leading the shift. That's where leading the shift comes along. Where people are actually open their eyes when they see change. So when you start breaking the ground and creating the opportunities, and people can see the results you get from that, all of a sudden it becomes like a wave. Everyone wants to be part of that, and that's where you can start amplifying the impact and hopefully start turning our cities into way more livable, resilient, and healthy places to live. So yeah, I think I'm gonna say something. So Shaan wants to join. She's been itching, trying to
Hard to be
back
quiet
into the picture.
Before we go into the review, I just wanted to add one thing because, I think depending on what scale of projects you are accustomed to working on, you might be thinking, okay, well, like, how is this actually relevant to me? How am I supposed to incorporate this into my projects? Like, this sounds like a lot of water retention management, or water management, which, is what engineers do, or landscaping, which is maybe what the landscape architect does. But the reality is that when it comes to working with your clients, 99% of the time, you are going to be the first person putting pen to paper, right? Yes, of course, you might end up with a full professional team, and stormwater management is not something that you're engaging with, but you are the first person putting ideas on paper, and engaging with your clients. And I think as soon as you have awareness of the opportunity and why these principles can really make so much of an impact, you can start to incorporate these ideas. Because if you're not doing it, you can actually aggravate the problem. But as soon as you bring awareness to these ideas, just the way you're designing your roofs and your water management from day one can start to really positively impact the site and the larger ecosystems at a whole. And I think that's really what I hope that you sort of take away from today.
Yeah, beautiful. Well said.
Thanks.
So this is a quick review, and then we can go into the questions. If there's any questions in the chat or anyone that wants to ask any questions. So what we covered today, we talked about how you got to fix the broken carbon cycle. It's not just focusing about carbon emissions, which are important, but also looking at how we can try to how we can bring all that carbon back into the atmosphere, into land, and actually turn it into something that is productive, right? Carbon is a resource. So how can we tap into that resource? And we can only do that through vegetation. And the second big idea was about how health depends on the health of the ecosystem, right? So we know that we need a healthy planet to be healthy in general, but also we need a healthy ecosystem around us, because we are an ecosystem ourselves, and we depend on everything around us to be able to be mentally and physically well.
So on a side note of that, as I heard something where it says instead of taking your daily probiotic, just actually put your hands in the soil every day. You know, start gardening, and you will save yourself a lot of health balls down the line, and healthy food,
healthy soil,
healthy food.
Otherwise,
exactly.
The third idea that we talked about is that there are no natural disasters. So all the disasters that we claim to be natural are actually have been man-made. We've done it over years, right? So as architects, we obviously only have impact in certain, we cannot really impact the agriculture industry. So, but we can focus on the urban environments and completely transform them, because the urban environments have a huge contribution in this new world that we're shaping over the last few decades, right? And the fourth big idea is that buildings are not islands, right? So as we are not islands ourselves, buildings are also part of the bigger ecosystem, and we gotta be seeing them as part of it and projecting them and planning them as part of this bigger ecosystem what Shaan was just talking about. You wanted to add something?
No.
And lastly, the fifth big idea is that we got to apply nature's principles if we want to become resilient, and we want our projects to be resilient. And we got to understand what resilience means and how to apply these principles to our projects to be able to tap into nature's resilience potential, right? So that's all for us. Just before we hand over to Skura for questions, we want just.
Okay, we put in the chat, right?
Yeah, I guess just quickly, if you really resonated with what we talked about today, the ideas that we talked about, we're hosting a full day, category 1 CPD point accredited course online on Wednesday next week. It's the 8th of October. And we're going to be going deeper into these ideas. We're going to be talking more about practical tools that you can use for applying these principles to your projects. So it's going to be a really fun day. It's going to be quite interactive. We've got some activities to do as well. So it would be awesome to have you guys join us, and you put in the link there.
I will now, or maybe you can do that. Yeah, I think so. The CPD course is going to be really interactive and engaging, and we're going to dive a lot more into like practical applications of this. So yeah, we really hope that we can see you there.
Thank you so much, Gonzalo and Shaan. There's a question there on by Mike about your projects.
Yes. I'm assuming that
are you talking about any projects at all?
Yeah, so we've we showed you one of the projects, one of the conceptual projects that we've done. We've done a lot of work with especially homesteaders, people living on larger properties, and that's been a lot of the focus that we've done in the last few years. We For the last couple of years, we actually shifted the way we provide our services to our clients, and that's again could be another talk for another day. But we believe that our role as professionals is not design things for people, but actually help people to be able to make the decisions themselves. So the services that we provide them for our clients is actually a co-design process. So we've been working with people from homeowners, or property owners from around the world. We've done projects in Portugal, a few in South Africa. We got courses online. We got people from all around the world, from the States to Australia. And our focus is actually literally showing them the tools that they need to apply to be able to actually come up with a design for the properties themselves. And we just guide them through the process. So we kind of really claim that they're our projects. They're actually their own projects. And we do show in our courses, we show some of these examples. But yeah, so it's essentially large scale projects, master plans, and as I said, co-created with the owners. I don't know if that answers your question, Mike. You want to hear more about the details of the project itself, or what kind of projects I'm doing? I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
All right, thanks, Gonz. Yeah, fascinating talk. Just wonder how many lessons you've learned from Ruben. And he would have given you lots to think about, I'm quite sure. But yeah, no, it was just it
You know
was.
what?
I try to teach him some stuff.
None of this is my fault, promise you.
No, it was just really. It would be fascinating to see the application. That's all. It's a great topic, and well done for your thoughts and your work. All the very best.
Thank you.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go for it.
I have a lot to say. So, for those of you that don't know, both Gonzalo and I worked for Ruben Ready for many years, where we worked on a lot of really complex sports infrastructure projects and healthcare projects. And what I love about the application in the natural environment is that just like these buildings, which are so complex, you have really complex clients with many moving parts, you have big professional teams, you have a lot of overlapping things happening in these buildings. And nature operates in exactly the same way. You're dealing with really complex systems that are all overlapping, all have their own agenda, but also have like interconnected agendas. And I think that's why we're so passionate about that strategy and that planning. And exactly why we started really helping more with like working more with individuals is because they start trying to do this work in sort of permaculture or on their own land, and they become completely overwhelmed by all of these moving parts, and they don't actually have the skills that we have as architects to merge all of these things together in a way that is not overwhelming, that's manageable, and can become something really seamless. There's that great quote of like the sum of the part, or what is it? Like the whole is more than the sum of the parts. And I think nature is the perfect example of that, and what we can help people to create through the way we intervene with nature in our buildings. So yeah, it definitely all comes from, I think, that strategic planning background.
Yeah, I second that. Yeah, I think we thought it's interesting because we thought we were walking away from architecture and changing our lives, but the reality is that all that experience that we have for many years, and working with Ruben for, I think it was for 17 years, is being a great part of how we operate, and how the way we think, and we actually just changing the tools. And as Shaan said, we just literally, instead of working with mortar and bricks, and we're just now dealing with nature. But and to be honest, our focus up until recently is being more on a larger piece of land, working with, as I mentioned just now, working on a large scale land properties. But I can see so much potential on bringing all these ideas, and that's kind of being the talk today has been more focused about what you can do in urban environments, just because we see that a lot of the professionals are working in these environments, and there is so much potential. There's so many things that we can do, and that's definitely something I would like to eventually in the future to get more involved in, is like actually work on more urban projects and see how we can transform our cities. But up until now, our focus has been more on rural environments and small scale homesteads and small scale property owners.
Gonzalo, I like the idea you had on the parks, functional parks. There was one that looks quite well designed and all that, like how a landscape architect would. And the second one mimics nature. And I quite like that idea, because the beauty is not really in the pathways and how you manicure or cut your bushes and all that. It actually is just how the system works. That's the beauty of it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of things that we could dive into and kind of try to put everything into like 1 hour. But one of the things that we're not talking about is that it's all about function, right? So nature is all about function, and everything has a function. We may not understand what it is, but there is a function. There is a reason why things are the way they are. And often when we look at projects, and I don't want to criticize anyone, but often when we do like landscaping projects, and it's all about modern functions, about aesthetics, about colors, about things like, and the difference is when you're looking at things with nature in mind and function in mind, then you end up with amazing landscapes, amazing ecosystems. Like this park that you're talking about is using water as a catalyst to create a wetland ecosystem. Wetlands are one of the most powerful, effective in terms of carbon sinking kind of ecosystems, and it's actually one of the most vulnerable all around the world. I mean, there are some statistics, I don't remember the number, but something like ridiculous, like 80% of the wetlands in across the planet have been dried out. For many different reasons. The main reason is that wetlands are usually happening on coastal areas, because that's where the land becomes flatter, right? And these areas are the ones that they have more pressure from the building industry, so they dry up. They dry up these wetlands. I mean, Durban is a clear example, right? Durban used to be a wetland system between the Allegheny and
Sorry,
the
Alwan, could you please mute your mic? Thank you. So sorry, guys.
So they're very vulnerable, important ecosystems. So what this project is about is actually bringing back the idea of a wetland, this really rich ecosystem, into the core of a city. I think it's super powerful, and that's something that it can be done in many different places, and deals with two projects, as we mentioned earlier. Deals with the stormwater problem, and also deals with the problem of creating a really healthy ecosystem that is actually creating reducing the heat gain of the city. So yeah, very good example.
Okay, great. I think it's a fantastic way of looking at things, Gons, and I think what you guys are doing is definitely the future. South Africa obviously is a water scarce country, and as such, the environmental department keeps a close eye on water bodies, whether you destroy them or whether you create them. Yeah. In your experience, what would be the response of the environmental department in this approach, in creating, let's say, reservoirs, for example, from stormwater, etc.? What would be, have you looked at the regulation, how that would affect the work that you are doing?
There's something here as well from Roz.
Yeah.
Putting it on the same lines.
So yes, there's a question from Roz.
So there's just a comment from Roz Harbour, kind of similar. So I thought maybe we should read that.
Okay, I didn't see it.
Into this idea as well. So she says, We tried to do this in 2012, in a remote village where KZN, when the rainfall is maximum of 500 millimeters. It was a very large project for Department of Public Works, but they'd have nothing to do with it. We worked with Ezio Gori, and they gave a talk on it. So, obviously has had some challenges getting Department of Public Works on board with these types of projects in the past. I don't know. Yeah.
I think it depends on the project. I don't believe that these kind of changes can come from the departments. This is something that it needs to come from. I really believe that like if you look at the example of Brad Lancaster, if he had to get everything approved before he did what he did, it would never have happened.
Of course. Yeah.
The reason why it happened is because he said, you know what? I mean, and that's kind of an extreme case, right? I'm not saying that you should be doing that, but he went overnight with his brother, and then with an angle grinder, he cut the curve down, and then he allowed that water to come into his verge, around his property, and he started digging up the garden and planting there, and then nobody said anything, and then by the time they realized, there was this beautiful gardening growing around the what used to be a dry dirt pavement area, right? So, and then all of a sudden that caught attention, and people thought, wow, this is quite powerful. So they turned that now into regulation. They turned out into guidelines for other neighborhoods. So he made a huge impact, created a huge impact in the city, and now is actually considered one of the greenest cities in the States, a city that it was never really in the picture, and just because he started that process. So I'm not saying that you must go overnight and then just do illegal things, but
Architects gone wild with angle grinders in the streets.
Good legal things.
Yeah, but you can you have to push the boundaries as much as you can, and I think that will depend on each one of the projects. What Ross says, like, if you got an idea, if you got an opportunity, without breaking the rules, or if you want to break them at your own risk, but take things to the extreme as much as you can, and do things. Because once the department sees the impact that you can create, once the water department or the environmental department sees that you can actually transform these green areas in our cities, in whatever development it is, you can do that in a small suburban house. If you've got a project of a house, instead of look at how you can integrate that house into the landscape. Start creating, if your neighbor will do the same thing, and then all of a sudden the whole neighborhood is transformed, right? And then the department will look at that and say, okay, maybe we should actually start looking at regulating that stormwater should be first put into the landscape, if it can, and before like you actually put into the stormwater regulation, and encourage people to do that so there is less pressure on the infrastructure. So yeah, I don't know if it answered the question, but
yeah, well, I think, especially us in KZN, we're dealing with these really big flooding events more frequently. We all know, when you have that heavy downpour, like our stormwater systems are not coping. Like we all drive through the streets and you can see the stormwater overflowing. It's just gushing down into the sea, essentially, eventually causing all of these problems. And we have an opportunity to safely improve these systems from a small scale to a large scale, with really simple. And what I love about it is it can be really simple interventions. We're not talking about big, costly, high-tech things. Like they can be really small interventions that can start to make an impact at a larger scale.
Yeah, because also I just want to add that the opposite route, which is what I've seen a lot happening, is that you can go the over-engineering route, right? And that is, for me, it's quite a dangerous space, because things are changing quite rapidly. And again, engineering is like a machine, it's fragile. And I'm not saying that we must not look at engineering. It's called space, but engineering is about efficiency, and it's very different as we're talking about resilience. And I'm just looking at the problems that happened in Valencia a couple of months ago, and you're probably all seeing in the news. And if you look at all those ramblas, all those places that actually were completely overwhelmed, but that very unusual rainfall, they were all dammed, they were all channel places. They're all being engineered, and the engineer could not cope with that amount of water. If a river is running naturally, it will behave in a very different way, right? So you now causing, as I was one of the ideas that we talked about, we tampering with the way that nature operates, and we actually causing the future problems by the way we're doing things now. So it's only when you start now working with nature, in my view, that you can start now creating that balance and creating that resilience. So, and that's something that the departments will have to see and will have to open their eyes to, and hopefully will be more initiatives to apply this kind of ideas to our projects.
Look, at the end of the day, Gons, regulation is done by people, and as a collective, we are able to influence that. Here's your former neighbor who's not converted yet. He still lives in the city. Richard.
Richard.
It's muted.
Sorry, let me unmute myself. Morning, everybody. And I'm really sorry I joined this meeting late. I gave myself a late morning and then forgot to. I apologize. The couple of interesting things recently. One, the guy who invented the term sponge city, a Korean architect, died last week.
Yes, that's what we spoke about. Yeah.
And Graaf Reinet and other original Afrikaner settlements in this country all had integrated stormwater feeds into urban plots. So
amazing.
Beautiful.
Yeah. The original way that South African cities were developed was developed like this.
Yeah, exactly, with our leefwaters and all of that. Yeah.
All the leefwaters. This was embedded into our cities. The fact that we failed to do this in all townships, and the way townships from the 1940s and 50s were engineered as incredibly unsupporting environments, both on a social and on a physical and on a sort of environmental resilience level, is amazing, you know. And we just forget the lessons of the past, which are such simple, basic gravity engineered the way the Romans did it kind of thing, you know. And we've really got 100 years of really bad decisions about the way we've developed our cities to overcome and get back. And it's not, and the solution isn't flipping putting moats around building in Umhlanga Ridge. You know, I mean, let's be real. That those flippin' landscapes, which are completely inaccessible to human beings and actually look very nice when you're driving in a car, but feel very shit when you're on foot, also really need to be considered.
100%.
How we make those public spaces in our cities.
And the irony being, we live in such a water-rich province, and yet so many people don't have water security. You know, it's unfathomable.
But I 100% agree with everything that you said, Richard. It's you spot on. I actually didn't know about Graaf Reinet, but it's actually great news. Yeah, absolutely.
Good point, Richard.
I don't know how connected they are to the sort of the water infrastructure now, but they used to be completely intertwined. Anyway, amazing, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Thank you.
Ruben?
Yeah, thanks very much, guys, for this. I think I just need to say that you're two amazingly talented architects in all respects. And we created our own ecosystem where they met. And the rest, as they say, is history. We still miss them in the office. Great contributors. And I don't know whether this one incident might have triggered Gons to relook at the way that he sees the environment and climate. We were doing the bid for Russia for the World Cup, the 2018 World Cup. I think it was in about 2011. And we got into one of the cities, it was Yekaterinburg, I think. and the temperature outside was 45 degrees, and I don't have a thermometer. I mean, I don't have a thermostat. I can't stand anything that's extreme. So pushed Gons out the bus and said, well, you go and take the photographs. And he had to take his gloves off because he couldn't handle his camera. And he was frozen stiff by the time he got back in.
Yeah.
And maybe that might have triggered this whole thing around relooking at the way that we need to engage with our environments. But thanks so much. And yeah, just one other comment around the issue of regulation. I think if there's enough activism around the way that we deal with these matters, and force the state to make changes around the regulations, then we must do that. I think the CSIR has done a few things that's forced the state to relook at the way that regulations are crafted, and then I think we must do that also with these interventions. Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks very
Absolutely.
much. Cheers.
Thanks, Ruben.
Thank you, Ruben. Yeah.
And I think you're absolutely right. I think that image of that trip of, taking photos of this frozen river, it definitely had a big impact in me. But I did really enjoy that trip too. So
yeah, and thank you so much to everyone for being here. Yeah, we really value your turnout and your time. So
that's been awesome, and we really enjoyed the engagement and the contribution of all of you and your comments, and that's been great. And hopefully we can take these ideas further and hopefully start transforming our cities and the way we do architecture. So yeah, thank you, Skura, for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank you, Gons. Thank you, Shaan, and thank you everyone for joining. I wish you all a good weekend, and we'll see you on the next talk. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye, Ruben.
Cheers, guys. All the best.
Bye, guys.
Cheers, Mark. Thank you.